The emperor, who killed my kind, thinks I'm his beloved daughter. He tucks me into bed, kisses my forehead, tells me stories about the brave knights who slaughtered the last dragon. I smile. I nod. I wait. He doesn't know I remember every scale, every flame, every scream. He doesn't know I'm going to burn his empire to the ground. I was the last dragon. Not the most powerful. That honor belonged to my mother, whose wings had darkened the sky for miles. Not the oldest. That was my grandfather, who'd slept beneath the mountain for 1,000 years before the hunters found him. Not the wisest. That was my aunt, who'd seen empires rise and fall and rise again. But I was the last. The final survivor. The end of a line that had stretched back to the beginning of the world. I remembered the day they came. Emperor Valerius's army, thousands strong, armed with spears and chains and magic stolen from my own kind. They'd spent decades hunting us, tracking us, learning our weaknesses. By the time they reached my mother's lair, there were only a handful of us left. My mother fought. Of course she fought. She was a dragon, and dragons did not surrender. She killed hundreds before they brought her down. I watched from the caves beneath the mountain as Commander Marcus drove his spear through her heart. She fell with a sound that shook the earth, and I felt something inside me break. My grandfather fought next. He was ancient, his scales dulled with age, his fire weaker than it had once been. But he was still a dragon, and dragons did not run. He killed dozens before the mages bound him with chains of enchanted iron. They cut off his head and mounted it on a spike for the soldiers to cheer. My aunt fought last. She was the wisest of us, the one who'd warned my mother that the humans would come, the one who'd urged us to flee to the mountains where they couldn't find us. But my mother had refused. This was our home, she'd said. We would not be driven from it. My aunt died screaming, her wings torn from her body, her blood soaking into the earth. I was the youngest, the smallest, the weakest. I hid in the deepest caves while the army slaughtered my family above me. I heard their screams, felt the mountain shake, smelled the smoke. I pressed myself against the cold stone and prayed to gods I wasn't sure existed to save me. No one came. When it was over, when the soldiers had gone, when the silence had settled over the mountain like a shroud, I crawled out of the caves and saw what they'd done. My mother's body was sprawled across the entrance to her lair, her wings broken, her eyes still open. My grandfather's head had been mounted on a spike, his mouth frozen in a silent roar. My aunt's blood had soaked into the earth, turning it black. The bodies of my cousins lay in a heap near the entrance to the caves where I'd hidden. They'd tried to protect me. They'd stood between me and the soldiers. They died for it. I spread my wings, took flight, vowed to avenge them. I was shot down 3 days later. The Emperor's wizards kept me in a cage for 10 years. They drained my blood to fuel their spells. They pulled out my scales to armor their soldiers. They cut off my claws to forge their weapons. They took everything from me, piece by piece, year by year, until I was barely recognizable as a dragon. I was a prisoner, a resource, a thing to be used. But I was still a dragon. And dragons do not break. I waited. I watched. I planned. I learned the names of every wizard who came to take from me. I learned their habits, their weaknesses, their fears. I learned the patterns of the guards, the schedules of the mages, the layout of the laboratory where they kept me. On the 10th anniversary of my capture, I escaped. I killed the wizards first, the ones who'd drained my blood, the ones who'd pulled my scales, the ones who'd laughed while I screamed. I burned the laboratory, watched the flames consume everything they'd built from my suffering. Then I flew toward the palace where the emperor sat on his stolen throne. I didn't make it. His armies were waiting. His mages had prepared. They brought me down with chains of enchanted iron, spears coated in dragon's bane, spells designed to bind and break. I fought until my wings were torn, until my fire was spent, until my blood ran black across the marble steps. I died on the steps of the palace, my body broken, my eyes fixed on the throne where my murderer sat. Emperor Valerius watched me die. He stood at the top of the steps, surrounded by his guards, his face cold and satisfied. I saw Commander Marcus beside him, the man who'd killed my mother. I saw the wizards who'd drained my blood. I saw all of them, the people who destroyed my family, standing together and celebrating my death. My last thought was not of revenge. It was not of fear. It was of all the things I'd never get to do. All the skies I'd never get to fly. All the fires I'd never get to breathe. Then darkness. Then light. Then a body that was not mine. I woke to silk sheets and sunlight. Soft, warm sunlight, streaming through windows made of crystal. A room that smelled of flowers and perfume. A body that was small, weak, human. I sat up so fast the world tilted. My hands, small hands, soft hands, a child's hands, clutched at a blanket embroidered with gold thread. My hair, long, dark, human, fell across my face. I was in a palace. I was a girl. I was the daughter of the man who'd killed me. A woman burst through the door. Beautiful, elegant, her face lined with concern. The Empress. My mother in this life.
Serafina, she said.
You're awake. Thank the gods. You've been asleep for 3 days. I stared at her, tried to speak. No words came. She sat beside me, pressed her hand to my forehead. The fever broke last night. The physicians said you might not wake. But you're strong. You've always been strong. I looked at her, this woman who'd married my murderer, who'd borne his children, who'd smiled while my family burned, and felt something I hadn't felt in years.
Rage.
But I didn't show it. I was a dragon. I knew how to wait. Father, I whispered. Where is father? The Empress smiled. He's in the throne room.
He's been so worried about you.
Shall I fetch him? I nodded. She left. I sat in the silk sheets, in the crystal-lit room, in the body of the daughter of my enemy, and I began to plan. The first years were the hardest. I was a dragon trapped in a human body, small, weak, fragile. I couldn't fly. I couldn't breathe fire. I couldn't do anything except wait and watch and remember. But I had something I hadn't had in my first life. Time. I was 7 years old when I woke in the palace. The Emperor was my father now. He tucked me into bed, kissed my forehead, told me he loved me. He didn't know who I really was. He didn't know I remembered everything. I learned to be human. I learned to smile when I wanted to scream. I learned to laugh when I wanted to burn. I learned to say, I love you, Papa, when I wanted to tear out his throat. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But I was a dragon. And dragons do not break. I spent the next 10 years learning everything I could about the Empire. The politics, the alliances, the weaknesses. The generals who hated each other. The nobles who plotted against the throne. The people who were tired of war, tired of taxes, tired of an emperor who'd built his legacy on blood. I had tutors, of course. All the children of the emperor had tutors. I learned history, geography, languages, mathematics. I learned diplomacy, strategy, the art of persuasion. But I also learned things my tutors didn't teach me. I listened to the servants' gossip about the nobles who came to court. I read the letters my father left on his desk when he forgot to lock them away. I eavesdropped on the meetings he thought I was too young to understand. I learned about the dragon hunters. The ones who'd tracked my family, who'd killed my mother, who'd brought me down on the palace steps. They were old now, retired, living in luxury on the wealth they'd stolen from my kind. Commander Marcus was the most powerful of them. He'd led the hunt that killed my mother. He'd been the one to drive the spear through her heart. He was my father's most trusted advisor now, a hero of the Empire, a man honored and feared. I learned about the wizards, the ones who'd drained my blood, pulled out my scales, cut off my claws. They were still working, still experimenting, still using the parts of my family to fuel their magic. Archmage Cornelius was the most powerful of them. He'd overseen the laboratory where I'd been kept. He'd been the one to order my scales pulled, my blood drained, my claws cut. He was my father's chief mage now, responsible for the spells that protected the palace, the enchantments that kept the Empire strong. I learned about my father, his fears, his weaknesses, his secrets. He was afraid of getting old, afraid of losing power, afraid of being forgotten. He'd spent his whole life building an empire, and now he was terrified of watching it crumble. He was right to be afraid. I started small. A word here, a suggestion there. I whispered in the ears of the nobles, planted doubts in the minds of the generals, spread rumors that no one could trace back to me. I was invisible, the sweet princess who never caused trouble. No one watched me. No one suspected me. I built a network of informants, servants, soldiers, merchants, people who'd been forgotten by the empire, people who were willing to help me burn it down. They didn't know who I really was. They thought I was just a girl who wanted justice. They didn't know I wanted revenge. They didn't need to know. The first sign that something was wrong came on my 15th birthday. My father threw a grand celebration. Nobles from across the empire came to pay homage. There was music, dancing, food, wine. The palace was filled with laughter and light. I stood beside the throne, smiling, accepting congratulations, playing the part of the beloved princess. And then I saw him, Commander Marcus, the man who'd led the dragon hunt, the man who'd killed my mother. He was old now, gray-haired, his face lined with years of wine and wealth. He walked with a cane, but his eyes were still sharp, still cruel. Still the eyes of a man who'd murdered without remorse. He approached the throne, bowed to my father, and turned to me. "Princess Seraphina," he said, "you've grown into a beautiful young woman. Your father must be very proud." I smiled. "Thank you, Commander." He looked at me, really looked, and something flickered in his eyes. Confusion, recognition, fear. "Have we met before?" he asked. "You remind me of someone." My heart stopped, but I kept smiling. "I don't think so," I said. "I've been in the palace my whole life." He nodded slowly. "Of course. Forgive an old man his fancies." He walked away. I watched him go. And I knew, in that moment, that I couldn't wait much longer. The second sign came a month later. I was walking in the palace gardens alone when Archmage Cornelius appeared. He was old too, bent with age, his face hidden beneath a hood. But I recognized him. I would always recognize him. "Princess," he said, "may I walk with you?" I nodded. He fell into step beside me. "You're very quiet," he said. "Most young women your age are full of chatter." "I prefer to listen," I said. He looked at me, really looked, and something flickered in his eyes. The same confusion, the same recognition, the same fear. "You have strange eyes," he said. "I've only seen eyes like yours once before." "Oh, a dragon," he said. "Many years ago. The last one. Her eyes were like yours, old, knowing, full of fire." I kept walking, kept smiling, kept my voice steady. "I've heard stories about the dragons," I said. "My father's grandfather killed the last one." "Yes," Archmage Cornelius said. "Yes, he did." He didn't say anything else. But he watched me for the rest of the walk, his eyes never leaving my face. I knew, then, that I was running out of time. The third sign came on my 16th birthday. I was in my room, reading, when my father came to visit. He sat beside me on the bed, took my hand, looked at me with something that might have been love. "Seraphina," he said, "you're 16 now. It's time to start thinking about your future. About marriage. About alliances." I looked at him, the man who'd killed my family, who'd kept me in a cage, who'd drained my blood to fuel his magic, and felt nothing. "I don't want to marry," I said. He laughed. "Every girl says that. But you're a princess. You have responsibilities." "I have responsibilities," I repeated.
"Yes."
"To the empire. To your family.
To me."
I looked at the window, at the sky, at the place where my mother had once flown.
"Father," I said.
"Do you believe in dragons?" He frowned. "What? Dragons. The creatures your grandfather hunted to extinction. Do you believe they existed?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Of course they existed. My grandfather killed the last one." "No," I said.
"He didn't."
I turned to face him. Let him see my eyes. Let him see the fire I'd been hiding for 9 years. "I'm the last dragon, Father. I'm the one your grandfather killed on the palace steps. I'm the one whose blood built your empire." I'm the one who's been waiting for 9 years to destroy you. He stared at me. His face went pale. That's impossible, he whispered. Is it? I raised my hand. Fire flickered between my fingers. Not much. Not enough to kill, but enough to prove. You're not my daughter, he said.
No.
I'm the daughter you murdered. I'm the sister you slaughtered. I'm the child you caged. I stepped closer. You took everything from me. My mother. My family. My life. And now, I'm going to take everything from you. He tried to call for the guards. I silenced him with a gesture. Not magic, just fear. He was frozen, staring at me, unable to move. The empire is crumbling, father. The generals are plotting. The nobles are scheming. The people are starving. And soon, they'll all know the truth. What truth? That you're a monster. That you built your legacy on murder. That the dragon you killed had a daughter who came back for revenge. I turned, walked toward the door. Wait, he said.
Please.
I'll give you anything. Money.
Power.
A kingdom. Just. I don't want anything from you, I said. I want you to watch. I walked out of the room, out of the palace, out of his life. Behind me, I heard him scream. I didn't look back. The empire fell within the year. I'd spent 9 years preparing for this moment. 9 years building my network, gathering my evidence, planting my seeds. Now it was time to reap what I'd sown. I started with Commander Marcus. I leaked the documents I'd stolen from his estate. Proof of his crimes, proof of his corruption, proof that he'd murdered not just dragons but people too. Farmers whose land he'd stolen. Merchants whose goods he'd taken. Women and children he'd killed without remorse. The people turned on him within days. He was arrested, tried, convicted. He died in prison, alone and forgotten. I didn't visit him. I didn't need to. I'd already buried him. Years ago, in the grave where he'd tried to put me. Next was Archmage Cornelius. I released the records I'd found in the laboratory where I'd been kept. Proof of his experiments, proof of his cruelty, proof that he'd tortured dragons for decades. The other mages turned on him, horrified by what he'd done. He was stripped of his titles, his power, his position. He died in a small room, with no one to mourn him. I didn't go to his funeral. I didn't need to. Then I turned to the nobles, the generals, the people who'd supported my father's reign. One by one, I destroyed them. Their secrets exposed. Their crimes revealed. Their lives ruined. They never knew who was responsible. They never suspected the sweet princess who never caused trouble. They never knew that the dragon had come home. The people rose up in cities across the empire, demanding change, demanding justice, demanding an end to the tyranny. I didn't lead the rebellion. I didn't need to. The people led themselves. I just reminded them that they could. My father tried to fight back, of course. He was a fighter. That's how he'd built his empire. He sent armies. He issued decrees. He executed anyone who spoke against him. But it wasn't enough. The more he fought, the more the people hated him. The more he tried to control, the more they rebelled. He was losing.
And he knew it.
The end came in the winter. The palace was surrounded. The rebels had breached the outer walls, taken the courtyards, captured the towers. My father was alone in his throne room, the same room where I'd watched him celebrate my death. I walked in through the main doors. He was sitting on his throne, looking old and broken and terrified. The gold and jewels gleamed behind him, but he'd shrunk somehow. Smaller.
Less.
You came, he whispered. I told you I would. What do you want? My empire? My wealth? I want you to know. I walked toward him. I want you to know that you did this to yourself. You built your empire on murder. You filled your coffers with blood. And now, the blood has come back to claim what's owed.
He stared at me.
I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for... You're not sorry. You're scared. There's a difference. I stopped in front of him, looked down at the man who destroyed my family. I'm not going to kill you, I said. That would be too easy. I'm going to let you live. I'm going to let you watch everything you built crumble. I'm going to let you become the forgotten one.
He reached for me.
I stepped back. Guards, he called. Guards. No one came. They're gone, I said. They've been gone for a long time. You just didn't notice. I turned, walked toward the door. Wait, he said.
Please.
I'll do anything. You'll die, I said.
Alone.
Forgotten. Just like my mother. I walked out of the throne room, out of the palace, out of his life. Behind me, I heard him weeping. I didn't look back. My father died 3 months later, alone, in a small room, with no one to mourn him. His children had disowned him. His wife had left him. His generals had abandoned him. He died the way he lived, surrounded by people who feared him, respected by no one, loved by none. I didn't go to his funeral. I didn't need to. I'd already buried him, years ago, in the grave where he'd tried to put me. But I visited his grave once, just to make sure he was really gone.
He was.
And I was free. The empire didn't end with him. The people built something new, something better. They didn't restore the dragons. I didn't ask them to. The dragons were gone, and they would never come back. But the people learned to remember them, to honor them, to tell their stories. I stayed for a while, long enough to see the new government formed, the new laws written, the new future take shape. Then I left. I wasn't a dragon anymore. Not really. I had memories of fire and flight, echoes of power, but I was human now. Flesh and blood and bone. It was enough. I traveled for years, across lands I'd once flown as a dragon. I saw the ruins of my mother's lair, the mountain where my grandfather had slept, the caves where I'd hidden as a hatchling. They were empty now, silent. The bones of my family had been scattered, their memories faded, their legacy forgotten. But I remembered. I would always remember. I built a sanctuary in the mountains where my mother had once lived. A place where people could come to learn about dragons, to remember them, to honor them. I filled it with books and artifacts and stories, everything I could find about my kind. I lived there for many years. Old, then older, then ancient. People came from across the world to visit. Scholars, historians, children who'd grown up hearing stories of the dragons. They asked me questions about what it had been like, what it had felt like, what it had meant to be the last. I told them everything. The fire, the flight, the family, the fall. I told them about my mother, whose wings had darkened the sky. About my grandfather, who'd slept for 1,000 years. About my aunt, who'd seen empires rise and fall. I told them about the hunters who'd killed them, the emperor who'd ordered it, the wizards who'd drained my blood. And I told them about the girl who'd come back, the daughter who destroyed everything her father had built, the dragon who'd waited 10 years for revenge. They listened. They remembered. They told the stories to their children, and their children told them to their children, and the dragons lived on. When I died in peace. Not because I'd forgotten, but because I'd finally avenged them. I closed my eyes for the last time in the sanctuary I'd built, surrounded by the memories of my family, the stories of my people, the love of those who'd come to remember. I didn't wake up again. I didn't need to. I was the last dragon, and I had done what I came to do.